When you think of Christian media hosted by vegetables, your mind probably goes to the 700 Club. But the second most famous is VeggieTales. Anyone who grew up in church knows that Christian media isn't exactly artistic. Oh, I don't mean movies, music, and TV shows created by people who happen to be Christian, or even mainstream movies tackling tough and interesting religious themes. If we discounted those, we'd be discounting some of the greatest art of all time. I'm talking about the kind of media that's made by Christians for Christians. The questions are simple, the answers are simpler, and the production values leave something to be desired. There's a whole Christian movie industry out there these days, producing some of the worst films you'll ever see, and churches attend them in busloads. Heck, I know there are at least two versions of A Christmas Carol that fall into this category, and I'm dreading them. However, even worse, somehow, is the media made for children. Strict religious parents don't want their kids watching Disney or Nickelodeon, but they can watch Gerbert or McGee and Me instead. Full disclosure, I was raised in the church, but my parents hated this kind of gross, poorly produced propaganda as much as any agnostic or atheist. We always laughed about how bad it was, honestly, even when I was little. There was one major exception to this rule, of course: VeggieTales. Everyone agreed that VeggieTales was good, no matter your religious beliefs. Why? Because it was actually funny. Yeah, imagine that. Were any other pieces of Christian media referencing Monty Python, Tales from the Crypt, The Grapes of Wrath, and, in a joke I still reference to this day, The Englishman who went up a hill but came down a mountain?
Hello, I am the Englishman who went up a hill and came down with all the bananas, leaving, of course, the inhabitants of the hill with no bananas, and therefore bestowing the term selfish upon myself.
You're so selfish!
Hello, I'm the Swede who went up a hill and came down with all the strawberries.
You're not Swedish.
Shh!
Sorry, I can't help myself. That one's still hilarious. The thing about VeggieTales was that the religious messages were still there. It didn't hide what it was doing, but it had humor and fun characters, so it worked. It helped that it was always done in the name of positivity and affirming life lessons, not damnation. VeggieTales was huge in the 90s and early 2000s, but as these things often do, it got too big too fast. In 2004, creators Phil Vischer and Mike Naraki lost control of the franchise after their studio, Big Idea Productions, declared bankruptcy. This is a long story I won't go into right here, but it was right around this time that they released their take on A Christmas Carol, choosing instead to set it at Easter. It's one of the most influential books ever written. Even if you've never read Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, you are familiar with it. My name is Colin Murr, and I've loved this story for as long as I can remember. I'm going to be taking a look at all of the movie and TV adaptations of A Christmas Carol that I can, because I love the story that much. This is Scrooge, the Christmas Carol podcast. Veggie Tales, an Easter Carol, or the rise and fall of the Romaine Empire. Last year on the podcast, I covered a July 4th themed adaptation of A Christmas Carol, and this year I'm covering an Easter one. There aren't too many other holidays out there that get one, but there are at least two that are Easter-centric. VeggieTales had done Christmas specials before, and An Easter Carol is actually a sequel to one of these that was called The Star of Christmas from 2002. That special and today's special do come from after the era when I was watching VeggieTales, so no nostalgia's at play here, except for the franchise as a whole. For those that aren't aware of this franchise, you have to think of the characters like the Muppets. They're essentially a theater troupe. They might get cast as similar characters in the productions they put on, but a lot of what we see is also backstage antics. Not on this episode particularly, but on a lot of the episodes. Bob the Tomato is basically Kermit, the high-strung straight man, and Larry the Cucumber is Fozzie Bear, the childlike, kindly comedic relief. Don't come at me in the comments, I'm generalizing here. An Easter Carol is set in Victorian London, where Ebenezer Nezer, played by the pickle Mr. Nezer, often cast in villainous roles, runs an Easter factory. For those curious, the name Mr. Nezer is actually not a play on Ebenezer, but rather Nebuchadnezzar, a biblical character he played in his first appearance. Anyway, Ebenezer's grandmother loved Easter, and now that she's dead,
Yeah, Brian.
he wants to make Easter bigger than ever. He wants to do this by tearing down a local church to build an Easter theme park. All right, let's get the big issue out of the way here. Why wasn't Archibald Asparagus Scrooge? He's British. He's stingy and uptight. There's a younger Asparagus who could play his younger self. All right, I'm kidding. I'll stop dreamcasting a VeggieTales Christmas Carol and get to the actual issue I'm talking about. I've already established a big difference between VeggieTales and the Christian media industry, and yeah, unfortunately here, they're leaning pretty hard into one of its favorite cliches, the evil atheist who wants to tear down a church. It's a cheap trope to establish a character as villainous in a Christian film, and sure enough, you can believe we'll learn the atheist used to be a Christian who fell away for whatever reason, and usually it's not a subtle, nuanced backstory, like Scrooge's slip into cynicism and greed is in A Christmas Carol. Nezer wants to shut down St. Bart's Church, where Junior Asparagus' father is the minister. Junior is playing Edmund, the Tiny Tim character here, who is vaguely sick, but it's really downplayed. Just for the record, all of the veggies have character names here too, but outside of Ebenezer, they're not names from A Christmas Carol. Again, this is a sequel to a different one, so it's a lot to keep up with. I'm just going to call them their main veggie names so we're not confused. The Muppets at least knew what to do with this. Now, to be fair, one of the concerns they voice about Nezer shutting down the church is that they won't be able to keep their orphanage going. Of course, this raises questions about why they couldn't just do it anyway. If everyone in the church wants to keep helping orphans, couldn't they just start another church and orphanage, somewhere else? Maybe I shouldn't think too hard about the logistics and ethics of cartoon vegetables living in the poverty of Victorian England. I do appreciate that they at least try to include this. Bob and Larry work at Nezer's factory, and they serve as essentially the Bob Cratchits of this story. Hilariously, they have a lot in common with Elliot Loudermilk from Scrooged, as we sometimes cut away from Nezer to see them trying to break into his factory. Okay, they're doing it in the name of trying to save the church, but it is funny to see religious kids media putting them firmly in the realm of anti-heroes. I have no idea if the creators were fans of Scrooged, but knowing the pop culture they like to reference, it might be intentional. It's also amusing that since Nezer has gone from selling real eggs to plastic eggs, his factory now employs plastic chickens. That feels like the VeggieTales humor I remember. We learn from various characters that Nezer used to go to church a lot, but he's taken all the wrong messages from Easter. His grandmother used to talk about living forever, and he took this to mean that he can keep her legacy alive by going all out for Easter. Now, they framed this as Nezer missing the obvious Jesus saves message of Easter, but I don't know. If he was this close to his grandmother, maybe she was just really bad at explaining things. This brings us to the question that has been plaguing adults who grew up with VeggieTales for years. Can vegetables actually become born-again Christians? I already made my Pat Robertson joke, so I won't again. I know this sounds like a joke, but it has actually been the subject of much debate. For the most part, they're just vegetables who act out Bible stories and other moral lessons, and they never portrayed Jesus as a vegetable. This was at the request of Phil Vischer's mother, and it's a smart call so you don't lose audience members. Plus, no one wants to see, like, a piece of celery hanging from a cross. Think of the logistics. Does it bleed? Where do you put the holes when he doesn't have arms? Phil's mother also didn't want the vegetables themselves to have, quote, a redemptive relationship with God. As far as I can remember, they mostly did a good job of sticking to these rules for a while, at least the videos I remember growing up with. Again, they were doing stories from the Jewish Bible or non-biblical stories with moral lessons. The one exception I remember is the Good Samaritan, but even then, that's a parable Jesus told, so they didn't have to have him narrating. They just said Jesus told this story and then Bob the Tomato told it or whatever. We don't want to see a Jesus onion getting betrayed by Judas Iscariot. Here, though, it would appear that one of these rules is out the window, but not the other, which makes it even weirder. Jesus is apparently a human in this universe, and it's made quite clear by the stained glass windows of the church. This means the vegetables can have a redemptive relationship with the human being, Jesus Christ. That's it, he would have been a bean. You can see how weird this is, right? What is this weird hierarchy where Jesus, Mary, and Joseph were humans, but everyone else in the world is a vegetable? I am not someone who likes to get hung up on logistics like this beyond a joke or two. It can be funny, but that's not actual film criticism, it's just cinema sins. Don't think too hard about how a universe works, and enjoy the show. Here, though, it does lead to actual problems because these characters are celebrating Easter, and I don't mean that in a vague bunnies and eggs sense. In fact, they're mad that the pickle is celebrating Easter in a bunnies and eggs sense. If you can put all of that aside, there's another major issue with this, and that is, sadly, the ghosts. Yeah, you know it's hard to get over the hurdle of a Christmas Carol adaptation that doesn't have good ghosts. Well, technically, this doesn't have ghosts at all. Nezzer falls asleep and is visited by a vision of his grandmother.
Grandma?
Ebby, get up off the floor. Don't you recognize my voice?
Ah! That's a ghost!
Nonsense! Didn't I teach you there's no such thing as ghosts?
Oh, yeah. Well, what are you then?
You're having a vision.
This is obviously a concession to Christian parents who don't want their kids thinking ghosts are real. But you're doing a Christmas Carol. If you don't want to do a ghost story, maybe don't adapt a book whose subtitle is literally Being a Ghost Story of Christmas. Also, if you're a Christian who takes a literal view of the Bible but also thinks ghosts aren't real, you're going to have a few hiccups when you actually read the thing. Anyway, Grandma Nezzer, or the vision of her, whatever, hasn't come to share regrets, but rather to just tell her grandson he was wrong and she was right and he better listen now. So, this is why Jacob Marley worked so well as a character. He's a tragic figure who has regrets. Just telling someone they're wrong isn't compelling. We saw it in an American Carol too, and their version of Marley just preached. The three ghosts are replaced with a single angel. Apparently, it would be sacrilege to portray them as vegetables too. Can the angel at least be funny? Also, no. She's voiced by Christian singer Rebecca St. James, who I'm sure all the 8-year-olds in the audience were clamoring for.
You're the visitor!
Ding, ding, ding. Give the man a prize. Perhaps you aren't as dense as they say.
So, what are you doing here?
Well, maybe you are.
When the angel and Nezzer start flying, he does ask her if she can present it all in just a picture book or maybe some slides. I don't think this is a reference to all those silent versions where the ghost just projects Scrooge's past onto his wall, but who knows? I'll give him the credit here and say it's one. They end up at St. Bart's Church. I don't know, probably didn't need to fly there. His grandmother used to take him there, and she really loved Easter Sunday in particular. There is a bit where Nezzer tries to yell loudly at his grandmother after being told she can't hear, which is kind of funny. We also learned that his grandmother gave him empty Easter eggs to represent the empty tomb in the Bible. Well, that's kind of a cruel way to do it. She draws his attention to the stained glass windows throughout the church that depict stories of Jesus, but he just starts selling his Easter eggs and making money. Oh, great, so we're doing that whole he's always been a greedy jerk bit. We then go to 1 year in the past where Nezzer brings in his inventor friend, played by Pa Grape, to build him some mechanical chickens. Ever since the death of Nezzer's grandmother, production has been down, with the chickens at the Easter factory not laying enough eggs. So wait, hold on, they were real chickens until a year ago? But in his childhood, his grandmother gave him plastic eggs? Feels a little inconsistent. Nezzer and Pa Grape sing a song about plastic chickens and eggs over the beat of a mechanical device that's going off in the background. It's very amusing.
Hey, you called for an inventor?
Why, yes, I did, Seymour. You see, I got a little problem.
Problem?
Problem. Yes, I got a little problem with my chickens.
Chickens?
Birds.
Boys.
Birds.
Well, I don't know why you called me then. I'm an inventor. And I don't know much about Boyds.
Boys?
Boyd.
Yep, and I don't know nothing much about Boyd.
We then learned that he never even paid Pa Grape for the inventions. At least we're not making this all about him skipping church, and we do see that he needs to be less stingy. Want even more Scrooge, A Christmas Carol podcast? You can follow me on Patreon, and for as little as $1 a month, you can get access to all episodes 24 hours early. For $5 a month, you will also get a bonus episode every month about a TV episode based on A Christmas Carol. This month's is Ebenezer Sanford from Sanford and Son. And for $10 a month, you'll even get the right to vote in polls. Just go to patreon.com/Scrooge A Christmas Carol podcast. Next, we're in the present outside the factory, where Nezer is completely oblivious to Bob and Larry behind him, unsuccessfully trying to break in. Their methods, of course, get more ridiculous, including a failed attempt with a seesaw. Very funny stuff. I'm always going to be a sucker for the funny background event trope. It works really well here. Nezer also visits the home of the Asparagi, who are meeting with Scooter Carrot, who appears to be the janitor or groundskeeper of the church. They all talk about how obvious it was that Nezer was missing the true meaning of Easter, and that his grandmother commissioned all those stained glass windows so he'd understand. The minister almost has a realization that maybe he didn't explain what Easter means well enough, but then his wife immediately tells him it's not his fault. Hey, maybe sit with that a little longer. Even though he does undeniably lean into that evil atheist trope, Nezer, for the most part here, is portrayed as too dumb to understand, not malicious. Maybe they should actually be helping him more. Also, I'm not saying that stained glass windows are inherently bad, but maybe his grandmother was the kind of Christian who just wanted to buy stuff and judge others behind their back. She kinda seems that way in some of the scenes, but she's presented as a perfect beacon of morality. Paying for expensive stained glass windows doesn't really express anything besides spending money. The Tiny Tim angle is, like I said, quite underplayed here. Junior Asparagus is dying of some vague condition, but it kind of feels like they're doing the plot point just because they have to. Also, he has a line where he insightfully points out that Nezer isn't bad, he just doesn't know the true meaning of Easter. Okay, not as bad as some overly angelic Tiny Tims, since literally everyone has been pointing this out the whole movie, but yeah, it's still a lot. Then, instead of something, I don't know, heartwarming or funny or mildly amusing, we get a sermon. They go back to the church, and the angel lays out the plan of Christian salvation in song. Subtle. Nezer seems fine with it now that has been properly explained to him, which again backs up my interpretation that just everyone else in this story is a terrible communicator. Even though all of that seems to work, we do still need Easter Future, because this is supposed to be a Christmas carol. I mean, without the ghosts, but whatever. Nezer sees Laura Carrot, one of the orphans taken care of by the church's orphanage, on the streets trying to make money by selling pencils. He asks why the orphanage isn't taking care of her, and the angel says that without the church and the hope of Easter, the orphanage shuttered. So, this is odd. A piece of Christian media acting like Christians would literally stop helping those in need without an expensive building to do it in. That's something. I can accept that this look at the future is being played up to over-the-top degrees for Nezer's sake. But it's still odd. What also bugs me is that Nezer asks why she isn't being taken care of by the orphanage. This could be his "are there no prisons, are there no workhouses" moment, but it's not meant that way at all. When Dickens wrote about that, it was to criticize the systems in place that weren't doing enough. It's such a weird message to have this future show a system no longer being in place. I don't know. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just really odd when you know what the book was about and going for. It just confuses me. We also see that in this future, cops are corrupt and look the other way when theft is committed. This is meant to be an alternate future, apparently. The angel says that without the hope of Easter, no one is risking their safety to help others. Nezer also sees the grave of Junior Asparagus and runs to stop the demolition of the church. The wrecking ball begins hitting it, and part of the top of the church is about to crush him to death when he wakes up. This might be a shout out to the priest's death in The Omen of all things, and that'd be pretty in line for VeggieTales, honestly. Of course, on Easter morning, Nezer runs in and stops the demolition of the church right as it's about to begin. However, in their attempt to break into the factory, Bob and Larry accidentally set something off in the factory, and now Bob is stuck in there and it's about to blow up. Nezer saves Bob in an overblown action climax that I'm sure was a lot of fun to animate. Does it have anything to do with A Christmas Carol? Not in the slightest. The factory actually does blow up, and it rains down eggs on the town. Nezer decides that all of his eggs are free this year. You know what? I'll give them some credit here that he doesn't just become some nice, wealthy industrialist and instead genuinely loses everything and just gives it all away for free. Mr. Nezer says communism. Good for him. No, I'm just kidding. His safe falls out of the factory, meaning he has all the money he needs. Look, I'm not really criticizing this plot point. It's what Scrooge does in the book, too. He has money, he uses it for better means. Nezer says he'll give more to the orphanage and help Junior get the medicine he needs, which is all kind of odd since in the present sequence they treated it like it was an incurable terminal illness. But again, they really didn't do this plot point well. I just think another rewrite could have made this clearer. Or the orphans as a whole could have been your Tiny Tim. Use him or lose him, really. This thing is just all over the place. Look, it's charming and funny in a lot of places, but those parts are often shoved into the background and the uninteresting stuff is pushed to the front. As a Christmas Carol adaptation in particular, I feel the same way about it. Some of it works really well. The Scrooge figure is miserly and he does get better, and he goes from not caring about poor people to wanting to help them. Additionally, the religious message itself isn't the problem. It makes perfect sense that a Christian media company is going to do a version of A Christmas Carol that focuses on the religious aspect of the holiday. I mean, the holiday here is Easter, but you get the point. I just don't think that the religious message is tied well to the social one. They keep bringing up the hope of Easter, but they don't tie the helping your neighbor aspect into that. These seem like two separate concepts, which is odd. Nezer's grandma donating stained glass windows to the church is portrayed as a good deed on the same level as funding an orphanage. Again, there's nothing wrong with stained glass windows, but come on. One of these things is more important than the other. I keep coming back to that scene in Easter Future, where no one is good to each other anymore because they've lost their church. I'll be clear, I don't think this is what they're going for, but it reminds me of Christians who would tell me that without God, they'd have no sense of morality and would just be as hedonistic as they please. That says more about the person saying it than it does about their God. Again, this is not the kind of Christianity that Veggie Tales promoted, but through a poorly written script, it does kind of feel like it is. If it had gone all in and shown that the people at the church, well, the vegetables at the church, were also being hypocrites, it could have gone a long way in fixing this, but it doesn't. I didn't talk much about the songs, but this is kind of a musical. There's an opening street song a la Belle from Beauty and the Beast. Grandma Nezer mocks her grandson in song, and the angel sings that song about Jesus. With the exception of that very fun song between Pa Grape and Nezer about birds, let's just say that none of these approach classics like the Song of the Cebu. I don't know all the production details on this one, but I do know that it came out at a time when big changes were happening at Big Idea Productions. And Phil Vischer has written and spoken about this a fair bit. Maybe in light of all this, they didn't give it the attention it deserved. It's still funny in places, and it nails some aspects of the story. It is not bad, and yet, I think with the right effort, this could have been a really good adaptation for kids, sure. It might not have been Mickey Mouse or Mr. Magoo, but it could have been great in its own way. It's tough to approach humor around Jesus when you're a Christian media organization. It's why they avoided it for so long, and yeah, maybe they should have stuck to that. So, like with all of my non Christmas holiday adaptations that I talk about throughout the year, not running this one through the adaptation meter, not ranking it against other Christmas carols, because it's not really a Christmas carol. In this case, it's an Easter carol. It is out there. You can find it. Thought for the month of Easter, even though I'm recording and releasing this after Easter, it'd be fun to talk about. Next year, I can just tell you I'm probably going to do the other Easter one because there is a Winnie the Pooh Springtime for Roo, which I said this on a previous episode. I said I was only aware of one Easter Christmas carol. I was aware of this as well. I just figured it was a vague springtime one, not an Easter one in particular. I don't think it's Jesus-y though, so you don't have to worry about, Winnie the Pooh going to confession or nailing theses to a door and saying bother the Pope. I think it's just a vague Easter one. But anyway, that's a long time off, obviously. But saying there is another Easter one in the future of this podcast. Next month, though, based on response to when I ask this, I am going to do an episode on an audio version or two of A Christmas Carol. There are many out there, and I thought the fact that so many of them are kind of important to the legacy of A Christmas Carol that I would talk about them. I probably won't go in strict chronological order. I think I'm gonna spend the first episode of it on the Lionel Barrymore adaptations of A Christmas Carol because he was such an important figure to our modern understanding of Scrooge. He played him every year on the radio, was a big part of Christmas for a lot of people. Never played him on film, but was supposed to in that 1938 film. So I think my first episode on the audio Christmas carols is going to be about that. So you can tune in for that next time. I'm going to have some more thoughts about this, of course, on this episode. And thank you for listening to Scrooge, a Christmas Carol podcast. All right, so I've talked a lot about Veggie Tales and An Easter Carol, and yeah, it honestly isn't fun for me that I have to say such negative things about something that I have some childhood nostalgia for. Again, not this episode in particular. I was born in 1992, so when this came out, I would have been probably like 12. I was not watching Veggie Tales by that point. And I hadn't seen the one that came before this either. It's not immediately preceding it, but the one this is a sequel to. I don't think I've ever seen the one called The Star of Christmas. I still look back fondly on it now. And I did see there was a movie that came out. I remember some friends showed it to me, even though I wasn't really watching Veggie Tales at that point. I was still thinking it was very funny. I think it was Jonah. That one, the funniest thing about that to me, they're again, they're the Muppets. It's the Muppets, but with vegetables, because that movie had like outtakes, and there was one. It's all animated, so the guy like was trying to get on his camel, and then like a plane flew overhead. Just the kinds of things that would happen in live action film today when you're trying to film a historical epic in the desert, but obviously it was with cartoons. Very, very funny. And I think there was also like a full in character commentary track. Like they really went to a ridiculous degree with their meta humor. And the guys who created it were very into that. Like I said, there was a Monty Python reference. The one I always go back to is that Englishman who went up a hill but came down a mountain. That one works on like three levels. Because first of all, it's just a reference to that movie, which is a funny title in its own right. Uh, Again, if you're a kid, it's just funny to have Swedish accents. And if you heard in that clip, someone off screen shouts, "You're so selfish," which is, of course, parodying both Veggie Tales and its cheapness, but also like the media of Christian film as a whole, which often has really simplistic moral lessons taught in cheap ways for kids. So it's a joke that works on many levels, and I still think back to that one and how funny that is. I'm laughing thinking about it because that's such a good joke. Uh, but that they were loaded with that kind of thing, and also, which I kind of hinted at, lots and lots of memorable songs. They had really good songwriters, really catchy songs. So it disappointed me that the songs in this weren't very good, save for that one, which some people say is a shout out to the opening song of The Music Man, which I'm sure it is. They had a lot of musical theater references. That kind of also has people singing over I think it's the train pulling out of the station and that, so it's kind of like serving as a percussion track. So that's really fun. Pog Grape was always a fun character, and he's great in that one scene in this. So yeah, like I said, there's a lot I like about this. It still has some of that magic, but yeah, I think trying to approach how do you put Jesus in one of these? Uh, it's a tough, tough dilemma. I wish I could say they cleared it, but I don't think they did. I don't know how they did after this. I think, like I said, they were already kind of losing control of their empire, and after this, they completely did. Again, I can link to a video I watched of this. It was really interesting. I know Phil Vischer has written a book about it. Uh, I see him on social media occasionally. He's, again, not what you'd expect from people who made Christian media, but VeggieTales is not your typical Christian media. He is someone who what I appreciate about him most of all when I've seen him talk on like political matters, and I don't doubt that we would have our differences, but he's not afraid to learn, and he's not afraid to say he was wrong in the past. We get a lot of people who don't do that, so there's that. He seems empathetic. Anyway, not to go down a rabbit hole on him, but He has a good sense of humor, always has, and that clearly came out in VeggieTales, but he had to step away. I think he kept voicing the characters, but he wasn't in control anymore. And that might already be the case in this one. I don't know detail by detail if it was or not. So I feel like there are other forces at work here, but I could be speculating because there are things I like and things I don't. So I can't say for sure. I don't want to throw accusations around of whose fault it is. I just think the messaging is weak. To say that everyone would stop doing the right thing because they don't have a church building anymore. Just, I think it's not actually quite clear. It's supposed to be a year later, but also in real time, he's going to start that demolition tomorrow. So they really should have had it be much further in the future where maybe something else happened and people lost their hope that way as opposed to immediately giving up, which just makes all of them look like awful hypocrites. Again, not what they were going for. But I have heard Christians actually speak that way when I was growing up in the church, like literally saying, if this was not true, I wouldn't be a good person. Like, I don't know how you say that. It's not most people, by any means. Some people probably used it as hyperbole. I still hated it. Hated it then, hate it now. You shouldn't need any of that to do the right thing. You should do the right thing because it's the right thing. And or people who say like, "Oh, if there's no God, where's your sense of morality?" And all those stupid questions that have easy answers because you care about other people's rights, right? That's what you should care about, regardless of what you believe in. And like I said in previous episodes where I talked about religious topics, every religion's value is going to come down to be good to others because that's a good human value to have. And I know that's what they're getting at here overall, in addition to Christian salvation for a pickle. So I don't want to knock them too hard, seriously, because I have a lot of respect for what they did with VeggieTales, and it was often really, really on the nose, funny and smart, and still getting its messages across. It was not ashamed of being Christian media. It wasn't stealth. It was very directly Christian, just wasn't obnoxious about it. And I didn't do well with them having Nezer be an evil atheist. Not because there aren't obnoxious people in every single belief set all across the world. Absolutely. What you can listen to my episode on my favorite movies of the 21st century where I talk about Heretic in some detail. But I don't like the trope because it's a stock character. And you can say, well, Scrooge is a stock character, but I mean, the parody version of Scrooge is, but Scrooge himself is by no means a stock character. He's a rich and nuanced, flawed human being, and he's a very well written character. So, yeah, throwing that cliche on Nezer, it just didn't sit well with me, And I do, joking aside, genuinely think that Archibald Asparagus could have been Ebenezer Scrooge. He's not in this one much at all, which is a shame because he's very funny. He's kind of a stuffy British character. He has a monocle. Kind of sounds like John Lennon. So, great character for this. But Mr. Nezer was always cast in villainous roles or misunderstood roles, at least. But again, he was Nebuchadnezzar in their Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego version, where he was willing to kill some vegetables. So he got dark on some of them. Yeah, like I said, I was little watching VeggieTales, and I always assumed they'd do a Christmas Carol just because everyone did. Again, I've loved the story since I was 4 years old, so I was expecting them to, and I always assumed it'd be the asparagus, but makes sense. Interesting they did it for Easter. Overall, maybe it played well for kids. Just felt like it needed some more tighter writing. But again, if you grew up with this, just leave a comment. What was your favorite silly song with Larry? Everyone has nostalgia for these who watched it. Song of the Cebu for me clears all the others, but what were your favorites? Leave me a comment and let me know. Like I said, next month we are going to go into the audio versions of A Christmas Carol. And there are a lot. And many of them star famous actors. There's one with Ronald Colman, one with Laurence Olivier, and of course, the famous ones with Lionel Barrymore, which we'll be getting into. So stay tuned for that next month. Scrooge, A Christmas Carol podcast is written, edited, and hosted by Colin Murr. Theme music is Christmas Day by TRG Banks. Clips in this episode are from Veggie Tales and Late Night with Seth Meyers. Leaving a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, as well as liking, commenting, and subscribing on YouTube will be a big help to me. You can also back me on Patreon. for early episodes, bonus episodes, and the right to vote in polls. Link is in the description. I'll be back next month with another episode of Scrooge: A Christmas Carol podcast. Until then, make sure to live in the past, the present, and the future, and ensure that the spirits of all three strive within you.